This is a Haag-Streit lamp cable, and sometimes they need to be replaced. This one needs to be replaced because it's gotten hot, burned holes, and that could be because either your pins are a little loose, or maybe it wasn't pushed down all the way on the terminals. It's possible that it was just left on all the time and got hot. And it's possible it wasn't making good contact with the bulb, and just to make sure, whenever you put your cap on, you should hear 2 clicks. Both these retainers should be, might need to pull them out a little bit each side, so that when you put your cap on, you're going to hear it click twice for each one. So if I was putting it on, I'm going to push it down. Maybe we'll hear 2 clicks. So if you hear both clicks, that means it's tight and it's sitting on the bulb correctly. So to replace this cable, got to unhook the connector, and you'll notice on the connector they've got some little ears on each one, and that helps them to stay together when they're pushed together. One tab fits on the other one and they lock in. And to pull them apart, you could just, it's hard if you just, but if you can just pull them open, that'll work. But if you still can't get it, you can get a pointer, and each side will have an opening where you can push the pin, the little tab on each side to loosen it a little bit so that you can release it. But don't push it too hard or you will break. You can break these little tabs. So if I was pushing it, you can see it rising up. If you do that on both sides, that should lift the tab up enough that you can pull it apart. But once you learn how hard it is to pull, it should just kind of pull open. So first of all, we're going to need to take the pins out of this connector, and sometimes this connector is burnt also and has a real bad scarring, and that's probably, it could be also because they're not connected well, or the wire isn't crimped on the pin well. So there's various reasons why this Molex also can get burned, one side or the other. But we're gonna, this one's not burnt, so we can perhaps use this one again. But as you'll notice, one side is going to be for the fixation, and you'll notice that the hot of the fixation is always by itself. You have these three together. These two are for the main bulb or LED, and then these two are for the fixation. And this is always hot, and this is hot. The ends are hot, the insides are the neutral. So we're going to see if we can reuse this, and I'm going to depin it. So this is an amp tool, an amp 305183 extraction tool. So we're going to push it in and see if we can extract these pins. So we'll push it in. We're leaving this out while we push in all the way, and then we push the pin. Pulling it out, pushing in all the way, and then pushing. These usually come out fairly regularly, easily, but sometimes these, because they've gotten hot, they won't come out, but we'll see if we can get them. Yep, that's the case on these. That for whatever reason, you can try to keep working it and try to get that pin out, but many times they just don't come out. They don't come out as easy as the fixation side. So we're just not going to use it. We're going to be getting rid of the cable anyway, so we're just going to cut these and get a new Molex connector. So I'm going to just go ahead and cut this one off. You can try to work it if you wanted to. If you were going to try to use the cable again for whatever reason, you might want to cut this connector open and try to get those pins back out. It's a little bit of work, but it can be done by cutting it open and getting those pins out. So that's what you've got to do. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and release these two, and these are 3mm. And notice how everything is, because you want to, when you put your new cable in, you want to try to copy the same setup. You see that the insulation ends right at your wire retainer, so that these wires are flexible, and they're both going to be about the same length. So we're not going to be replacing this. So this will be our guide when we put our new cable on. We're going to want everything to end up about the same length as your original. So these wire retainers are different sizes. This one's a little bigger than this one, and that's free. And we'll go ahead and free this one up, because we're going to be pulling the top off, pulling the cables out. which will make it easier to replace the cable. Once again, how this, we're not changing this, but this is how it looks. It's right on the end so that these wires are flexible. Okay, once we have these free, now these can be just pulled through. And I'll just mention that when it comes time to putting the pins back in, we're going to want to open up these little ears on the bottom sections. We're going to be opening up the ears just a little bit all the way around. There's 3 ears per pin, because when we push them through with our connector, we may have collapsed those ears a little bit. So when we wanted to stay back into our connector again, we want those little ears to be out all the way, so that when we put the pins back in, they're going to catch and hold. So that's later on. Okay. Now we're going to turn it around. And here's our cable. And the way this is routed, it goes in here and it turns, and then it goes through here. So we're going to have to take off our fixation arm so that we can get to the cable and pull the old one out and put the new one in. So we're going to have to take this fixation arm off, and it's the same size, 3mm, as our nuts, as our wire retainers. So just notice that everything is moving freely, and that's how you're going to want to end up. You'll know when you put it back together that you've got it right, is that everything is moving freely. And this is tight and everything is moving freely, so just notice that before you take it apart. Okay, we don't have to take the screw out of here. We can leave it in. And as we're turning it over, you can see how the cable is turned. And that's what's happening. It curls around as the arm turns. That cable goes around in this little cavity in here. It has room to travel. So you're going to want to reroute when you put it back together. Observe how the cable is compared to your arm. And hook the cable up the same way. Now we have this little cover here. You'll notice it's got 2 holes. One hole is for the screw, middle screw, and the other hole is for the cable for the fixation. And you have a little connector here. And to make it a little easier, we're going to go ahead and separate this connector. And if you want a quick guide to remind yourself, okay, which side is up and they're connected, you can just put a little mark to remind yourself which side is connecting. But there's only one way it can really connect. But that might be something easier. And then these will just come apart. When it goes back in, it connects back into there. So we can take this arm out of the way, and we can lift up this cover with a razor blade or something. And now we can see where our cable is going through and around. I turned it around, but it's like this. So you can see how our cable is going through here, and then through, and then that way. So to make it easier for us, I'm just going to go ahead and cut this cable off. What you might want to do is measure the distance of how long it is, so that when you put your new cable in, you can make it the same length. But this is about the length from the base to the tip. It's about 16.5 inches, or around 42 centimeters. But you can measure it just to verify. The old one might not have been long enough in and of itself, so these are probably close to the correct measurements for the new style. And I'm going to go ahead and cut it out here. I'm going to go ahead and push this up and out. Now, I could try to pull the cable all the way through, but to make it a little easier, I'm going to take this top bar off of the headrest to make it easier to run our cable back through. So I'm going to take these two screws off on each side. It's just a Phillip. Now we're going to pull this bar apart. It's probably not going to come off easily. You may have to hit it with some type of a rubber mallet or something. I'm going to use the end of my hammer that's got a rubber edge to it. And I'm going to knock both sides, try to knock them evenly so they'll come off. Okay, both sides. Now I'm going to lay this down, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this cable out. It's going to come out because there's nothing holding it. And now it'll be a little easier to, I can either pull it this one out or this way. And if you want to cut your cable off to make it shorter, whatever you want to do to make it work. This time I'm going to just cut some length off here so I can pull it in case I want to pull it the other way. So I can pull it either way. And you might want to push while you're pulling. This time I'm going to pull it through here. Okay, so that's out. When it comes time to installing the new cable, you're going to notice even on the end of there's a little mark there. That's just perfectly normal. That's from the manufacturer, so that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure and make a little mark where we want the end of our cable to end up at. So I'm going to get my measure and measure 16.5 or 42 centimeters. 42 is right there. I'm going to get a marker, and if you want to put it on the same side as the writing, sometimes if the writing is right where you're going to mark, that would be good. So I'm just going to put it right in line with that writing. Just a little mark. I don't have to go all the way around, just as long as I got a little mark. Okay, now that I've got my mark, I'm going to feed the end of the cable through the top. And looking for my mark, there it is. For now, I'm just going to keep it up a little bit, because once I have it in my position, I'm going to be able to pull it back out. So that may move, but just remember where your little mark is. And now it's time to feed the cable through this top bar, and you can just twist the cables together a little bit. And feed it through. Now you'll have to work it so that it will come out and push it. You'll have to try different ways to see which way is it really moving. You may have to move it around, but you'll begin to see which way really works. It really works. You're moving it at the right angle because the cable is coming out easily. So you may only be able to push it in a couple inches at a time, If you have to, you can pull this in while you're pushing it, but if you get the right angle, you can just keep pushing it in a couple inches at a time. Now, I'm being aware of where my mark is, so it's right there. I'm feeding it through. I'm going to have to decide, am I going to pull this or pull that way to get my mark to be even with the outside. And there's my mark right there. So I'm going to keep pulling this side or pushing it. I can still see my mark. If I were to pull it out, it would be too far, so I'm going to push it a little bit more. Now, when I pull this out, it's going to be just about even with that, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I think my mark is right in here. So I know I have my length where I want it. Okay, now we can begin to push the cable through the rest of it, the rest of the way. Pushing through. It's coming out the other end like it's supposed to. So there's a little bit of space there, a little bit of space here. Now I'm going to make them even. Okay, before I push it in all the rest of the way, now is going to be a good time for me to put the arm back on. So I'm going to put this cover back on. And I'm going to try to be aware of it being in the center, not over to one side turned, so you'll have to be aware of that. And then we're going to put our arm back on, put our connector back in. And it should click in, and you know it's in the correct position. Okay, now we've got that. Now we have to route our cable as we think about which way we're going to be turning it. That's the way we want our cable. Okay, so when we're putting it on, we're going to go underneath it and around. So we're working on the side with the screw hole. The arm is on this side of the chin rest, and we're going to go underneath here. Fit it back on. Make sure our cover's staying in position, going underneath. And this is not, the screw is not binding on the cable, and it's going inside our cavity. Once we have this tight, we're going to check it, check the movement, make sure it's moving freely, and your cover is still inside, not coming out anywhere. And this is tight. So now, and we're making sure our arm is on the right side of the chin rest. So now we can feed both cables back in evenly. And just like we took it off, tapping it with some type of rubber mallet, we're going to do the same thing, pushing it in even, both sides. Sometimes it's harder than others. Once you have it both flush, we can put the screws back in. Okay. Got our distance correct. Everything's moving freely. Now we can turn it around and work on our connector end. We've already got the standard length with our fixation cable. I'm going to go ahead and put that back together. With our wire retainer. The same side, the smaller one goes here. And you might want to turn it so that it's coming down. The flat side is on top. What I'm going to do is feed it through the wires first, the thin wires. And then push it onto the insulation. Okay, that we know that length. Now we have to cut our cable to length. I'm going to put a little bit of a loop in here. Where our wire retainer is going to be holding the cable, and then I'm going to route up and cut our cable. We're going to cut a little longer just to make sure for now. Cutting it way out here. Got my cable in. I'm going to put a little mark right past the wire retainer so I'll know where I want to cut. And everyone probably has their own way of cutting the insulation. But you might want to practice on the piece that you cut off. Go ahead and practice a few times. So on this set, I'm kind of squeezing it to cut the outer insulation, but not completely all the way. You're just going to have to practice. Actually, on this one I'm clamping it all the way around, and it's starting to show. So now when I pull it off, I'm not going to squeeze it all the way. I'm going to back off a little bit as I'm pulling so that I don't cut the insulation of the wires inside. You might want to get a little razor blade and finish cutting where you initially cut, taking care not to cut the insulation of the inner wires. But I can see here that I've cut the insulation of the inner wire. So you just have to practice. Good. I'll practice again. I'm opening it up a little bit while I'm pulling out. So you'll have to experiment on what works for you. I suspect that I'm not doing it the best way, but I'm still learning. And I've learned that if you cut shorter pieces, it's easier to come off. So I'm gonna go ahead and go halfway. I'm good. Okay, now I'm going all the way. I've got my mark. Okay, looks good, looks clean. Now if I had cut too deep somewhere, I would have to have put some heat shrink on there, but this time we were good. So I'm going to put my wire retainer on there, flat side up. Okay, now I'm going to cut these wires about halfway of what the pin is on this side, so I'll have just a little bit extra. Now when you're cutting the insulation off for your pins, you can go as deep as you want, but the factory kind of stops it right there at the edge, so that's what we're going to do. They stop their wire, so that's what we're going to do. We're just going to cut enough to go right to the pin. That's about how much we're going to cut. And on these, it's going to be 18 or 1 mil. Okay, I'm using these, and I'm going to use this size right here. It says 2022, and it's got a little crimp in there. That's where you're going to be crimping on the inside of the wire. So I'm going to turn it around. Actually, I'm going to load it from this side so that when I'm crimping, it's going to crimp the wire. That little point right there is going to be crimping right in there. So this, I'm going to line it up so that I can see the very edge over here to see when my wire's popping through. Not quite up here, but and what I'm going to do is visually examine how far my wire is actually going to go in. So that tells me that when I start to see the wire just about at the edge, that's when I know that I've gone in far enough. So I'm going to put my pin in. I'm going to pull it out a bit so I can see when it comes out. I'm going to insert my wire. And I can see it starting to come through and get to that point. I can see it there, so I'm sure I'm at the right depth. And I'm going to squeeze it. But if I want to, I can just barely squeeze it and back off and examine. Am I crimping it right? Yes. Actually, I see there's a little strand that's not right, so I'm going to take this back off and try another pin. Somehow one of the strands I'm going to try it again. Okay, I can see my wire. Looks like the right depth. I'm squeezing a little bit. I'll back off, make sure that the insulation is being grabbed. I can see that I can even push it a little further, get it a little closer. Now I can finish crimping. Put it back in. Crimp it all the way. Okay, I've crimped it, but it's kind of made it flat, so you might want to now squeeze it so that it becomes more round again, so it'll go inside the Molex connector. Okay, that looks pretty round, and we're tight on the insulation. Okay. Going to look and see how far I can go. Looks like I can go a little deeper this time. Okay, so I have a mental image of how far I can go. Okay, here we go. See my wire? I can go in a little bit. I'm going to squeeze it. Back off, check it. Looking good. I'm going to go ahead and squeeze it all the way. Now it's kind of flat. I'm going to make it round, more round. I'm going to squeeze the other way with the flat part, just to make it a little more round. Okay. Now we're ready to put it inside our Molex connector. But if you remember, we used the extractor to get these pins out. And what happens when you use the extractor is the little fins get bent and they need to be pulled out. There's 3 fins on each pin. We need to lift them out a little bit so they'll look like a new pin. If you get a small flat edge and just do each pin, each fin by going underneath it and lifting up a little bit. Putting my screwdriver underneath it and just twisting it, and that's raising it up. You have to do both pins. If you break one of the fins, you're going to have to put a new pin in. Okay, they're all there. Now when it's time to install our pins, I'm going to make sure that this is going to be on the outer. You see the arrow. And remember, the hot of the fixation is by itself. And then the hot of the main bulb is on the other side with the group of 3. So, and on here the hot is the dark color, brown here, and then the neutral goes right beside it. If the pins are having a little trouble pushing them in, go ahead and pull them out until you feel the click. Now, if you're doing an LED, sometimes the cables are different. Some old cables, the polarities are different. So if you wanted to just plug this into the other side without putting them in here yet to see if your LED is working, but we're going to assume it's correct. You can always change the LED polarity on your LED itself, but we're going to assume these are correct. Remember, our hot positive of the main bulb is also on the outer edge, and then the neutral is right beside it. Okay, pushing them through. That's why it's important that you squeeze the pins to make them more round so they'll go inside the Molex plug easier. And if you're having a little trouble getting it through, you can gently pull the pin out until it clicks, and look at the length, make sure they're all the same so they've all come out. No wire is exposed and showing, so we have a good connection, and we're about at the right height, the factory height of extending. It looks like it's about halfway here. When it connects to the other connector, it's going to be about right there. So that should be good. Just a little reminder, 16.5, 42 centimeters length past the top. The extraction tool is an amp, 305 183, 3mm Allen hex wrench. So I know this took a long time, a long video, and it takes longer to explain it than it does to do it. But after you've done it a few times, you'll get faster and faster, and you'll learn little tricks of your own to do it. It just takes time. So I hope that helps. This is a PS. I just wanted to remind you, here's how the old one was. And you can see how the pins were burnt on this end. So it's possible that this plug was just not going in all the way, wasn't all the way down, and so it could have been doing some arcing. When connections aren't tight, there's arcing takes place. So that could have happened, or it could have just been left on forever and it got so hot that heat transferred through everything and up to the pins, and it finally started melting there. So slit lamp should be turned off when not in use. So if you're going to reuse this when you need to clean those pins off. Okay, that's it.